My name is Harley David Anthony Epps Jr. I may, or may not have, received leukemia in summer of 2015 from a UFO. It took over a year of both not knowing I had it, finding out I did, and being too scared to face treatment, because when my grandma had cancer, it was the chemo that, to my 13-year-old mind, made her die faster and more painfully. To finally follow through with treatment, starting on Thanksgiving 2016. In December 2015 there was a time I was puking up blood, what I later found out to be one of what turned out to be many signs I had experienced radiation sickness, along with the development of leukemia, a non-hereditary cancer. My family was promised my death, yet I reached remission around 2-ish years later. I also developed GVHD, graft versus host disease, which my doctor said roughly 40 years beforehand would have meant certain death and was untreatable, and even when treated is just as deadly as cancer. Yet I overcame that. I was promised I'd never be able to produce children, and my wife and I have two, one being autistic, and it's common knowledge that these type of kids tend to have extraordinary minds and thinking capabilities, my son being 3 and thus far nonverbal, so I don't know. I have many questions as to the how and why me. Why didn't I hear the craft that stopped over my tent while camping in the sticks of Freeburg, Illinois? And more importantly, why did it take me roughly 2 years to even remember seeing the craft? I can't say in my memory that there's any recollection of seeing any beings from that night, but considering my life has never been normal, having an cocaine addict for a mother and an absent father, I've had a lifetime of things most people would never believe. My mother once taught me to play on a Ouija board and how to make one, and after a cabinet in the kitchen kept opening and closing, I jokingly set out a plate and said, "Maybe it's hungry," because I was 11, and my mother put it back and said, "Stop being stupid," and immediately a bottle of dish soap flew off the counter at least 10 feet and struck the back of her head. The next I'll discuss, I can't recall if it was before or after the Ouija board experience, but I remember being a child around that same young age and waking up to what appeared to be a long-haired little girl standing over my face as I slept, just for the kid to be completely gone before I had time to even put my glasses on. I can't see things without my glasses unless it's right upon my face. Yet the hall light was on and certainly bright enough through the doorway to see a small figure with long hair watching me sleep. And I could go on with stories like these. One that goes way before that, when I randomly walked away from my stepfather's mother's farm property, and all I remember is telling the cop who found me that I was following the Undertaker. I was an adult before I knew the definition of an Undertaker. To me, the Undertaker was specifically the pro wrestler portrayed by Mark Calloway. My whole life is riddled with mysteries like these. I was 22 turning 23 a month later when I started treatment, so I was 21 when I saw the craft, or rather the craft saw me. I just turned 31 on December 18, 2024. In the summer of 2013, I was out walking around a very small town next to Cahokia called East Carondelet/Dupo, Parier DuPont, which may as well be the same town, each being much smaller than the already small town I grew up in. That ex-girlfriend of mine had told me she herself was a practiced Wiccan, although I later learned she practiced if and when she needed to. Not only did I wake up one night and remember speaking in high-pitched growl of a voice that wasn't my own, I said the words, "She is evil," and immediately fell back out. Upon awaking, I told my ex, who was sleeping at that moment of my awakening, what I remembered, and that I also had a quick memory of a dream involving a blonde woman in a white dress who went down into cellar, and her jaw dropped and said, "There's a blonde woman in a white dress that everyone in my house has seen, and my mother tells me she's had nightmares of this woman choking her as she slept." Considering that girl later turned out to be cheating on me, perhaps this was a warning to me versus an attack. We dated for 4 months, and another night we were walking around back roads in the area surrounded by cornfields. One night it was me, my ex, Kat by the way was her name, and her friend Brett when I randomly looked back and noticed someone walking behind us in the darkness. Aside from moonlight and one streetlight that were in the middle of a lonely road that went for about a quarter of a mile, I pointed this shadowy figure out and my ex said, "I know I see it, don't look back it again." Naturally, curiosity couldn't resist. That's when I saw it walk under that only street light to find it to be a perfect humanoid that appeared to be made of darkness, a walking shadow if you will. We get further, I look back again. It's still seemingly slowly following us, but this time it was in the shape of a huge wolf that appeared to be running, but not gaining the speed it should have been. couldn't help but notice it was an imperfect form, almost as if it was made of smoke and couldn't hold a solid form as the wolf. In either form I saw no features, no typical glowing eyes or shining teeth of a lizard or shark, just walking shape-shifting black smoke. I'd also like to add that I was born at an Air Force base, although my dad received a dishonorable discharge from the Army on the account of my mother being a teenage mother who just randomly got uprooted from southwestern Illinois to Texas somewhere. And there are also at least 2 airports within 30 minutes of where I live. I even grew up in the town of Cahokia, named after the famous Cahokia Mound site that's actually located in what's known as Fairmont City, Illinois. I know aircrafts and what they normally sound like, and definitely have only seen 2 in my life to ever move or act the way the one that stopped over my tent did. The second time was a few months ago during the aurora, which I watched from my backyard in Belleville, Illinois, when suddenly I saw a perfect orb of light that's never out there and hasn't been out there since, and as soon as I saw it, it moved behind trees and never came out the other side, when I definitely would have seen it do so had it been a regular craft. I want to make it more clear that after studying and learning about other supposed contacted stories, or anything relating to the supernatural/paranormal, I think many of my experiences could have been related to whatever aliens I may be blocking from my memory, and in many of these cases, like Whitley Schreiber, also turned out to be born in an Air Force base and found out his experiences go back to childhood. So the girl I saw in my room may have been a disguised being, either physically and mentally making me see a girl, could be a ghost or one of the infamous black-eyed children. Now I can't recall specific features other than the short height, the long blonde hair, and the lighter skin. I've heard stories about BKs, black-eyed kids, being both relating to or working with the men in black, and some others claim them to be demonic in nature. And I found stories that state aliens and angels/demons could be one in the same, beings of a higher dimension versus all of these beings being from another planet. Some could be, but some stories say many are beings beyond time itself. I remain with a skeptical eye when I hear bumps in the night, always looking for logic first, but some things simply cannot be played off with simple logic. That same summer I saw the UFO. I saw a hooded figure watching me from the woods near Shiloh, Illinois. I was so terrified that someone was playing a cruel joke on me, or that I was being stalked by some evil being or some crazy cult member. And today, I've also found many stories of ETs coming throughout history in the form of cloaked figures. I was so terrified by it though that I simply went back in my ex's mom house and didn't say a word to my ex about it, didn't want to scare her, nor potentially get authorities involved in case it was some crazy cult. There was also the summer of 2016 in which I was driving my car in the back roads near Cahokia and Columbia, Illinois, known as Triple Lakes Road. This is one of my most credible stories, as with this one I was not alone, nor was it an ex who I no longer talk to, but a friend, a best friend named Gage who'd never experienced anything like what happened in my passenger seat. It was dark. We were aimlessly driving back there. I myself was not usually behind the wheel, so I didn't know the routes of where they all came out. Gage did. Mind you, we were always hitting roadies, as they're called. Ours only involved the rolling of marijuana, typically in the form of blunts. Eventually Gage asked me if I knew where I was going, and I said, "No, but I figured with you here you can help me if I get lost, or we'll just pull up the GPS app." Eventually, out of nowhere, it seemed the turn I took ended at what I can only describe as a house from Scooby-Doo. No lights aside from the moon to show enough of the house. A huge house with a circular driveway in front. What didn't make sense is every other house out there. You had to hit a hard 90-degree angle to the driveway. This house, it's like the road ended with this house. My friend immediately says, "We need to get the fuck out of here now," and immediately turned around and floored it. Upon getting so far down the road, what appeared to be a transparent torn-up sheet in form of some type of spirit, with a complete distorted yet blurred images on what would be the head area. Gage, after about 10 seconds of this thing literally hovering above my Toyota Corolla, keeping up with my at least 50 to 60 miles per hour movement before Gage says, "Dude, my fucking eyes are watering," which shook me because I said, "Mine are too." It also seemed neither of us could even try to look away from this. Had anything walked into the road, such as a deer, we would have crashed hard. Eventually we got so far that it simply vanished. The next day my cousin Ben, who knew the routes by memory, said, "There's no way you could have ended up where you did because I know those ways, and I have never seen this house nor road that suddenly ends with a big creepy looking house." He did know we would not lie about this, nor did he think we were lying. He was simply confused as to how it could be possible. There's also a repetitive occurrence throughout my life of streetlights randomly blowing out when I'm in vehicles that pass them. It's happened too often for me to think it's a coincidence. I've heard stories about this being potentially an alien or even angel/demon related. But I don't know. I pointed out a light that blew out 2 months ago as I was dropping off my 14-year-old sister, and even verbally stated how weird it's always been to me how often that happened. As I sit in my mom's driveway making sure she gets inside okay, the light to my left started to flicker, and as I looked at the street light it blew out. The more I keep remembering, the more my crazy shit goes on. Some will say this is all made-up bullshit. I'm trusting that you, the channel publisher itself, know I could easily write a book to tell all of this and try to make a profit, and I am an aspiring author, but hopefully of fantasy and fiction. Some will never believe these stories, but for those who do, know you're not alone, never alone. There are 12 dimensions of beings watching this earth, according to my constant research. I just want to hear from other people who can confirm I'm not completely insane more than anything else. You have no idea how desperately I want my story there, for my sanity, for answers as to if I'm simply the cattle of the evening, or if there's something more I was told and simply do not remember. I have never seen a hypnotist and am slightly afraid because once you know, you can never unknow.